Good morning and welcome everyone. I do appreciate you being here with me today. Initially, I wanted to make this presentation for my close friends, but I changed my mind and opened it to my colleagues here at York University. I would like to take you today on a special journey, but I warn you from the very beginning that at times it may create strong emotions. This is not a research presentation. It is not based on any theory. It is just lived experience that I'm sharing with you today. Some of you may see it as an act of courage. For some of you, it may feel odd for a public speaker to talk about love. Some of you may take it as a confession, or you may not understand anything from it. It's perfectly okay. You're my friends, and you're here today, some of you wanting to know what happened with Serban in the last couple of years. Some of you are seeing me today for the first time, but you are interested in learning how to become and stay mentally healthy. I didn't speak in public for more than 2 years, and sharing my story in front of my friends, it is the best way to regain my self-confidence and to help others at the same time. For me, this presentation is therapeutic. It's an important step on my healing journey. And I can tell you that the greatest journey one can undertake is the journey within oneself. As you listen to this presentation, I have only one request: to leave your ego at the door, to suspend any judgment for 2 hours and just listen with your heart. To paraphrase Paulo Coelho, the well-known Brazilian lyricist and novelist, life is a pilgrimage from love to fear and back to love. We all start in life as love. People are created to love and to be loved. I remember vividly how my children, who are here with me today, came into this world as I was the first to welcome them. What I saw at first was the pain that my wife and my children experienced, and I almost fainted when my children came out in this world. My wife and newborns were strong and brave. Bringing a new baby in a family was challenging, both physically and emotionally. Many parents are not prepared for the wide range of emotions they experience after childbirth. They often feel sadness, anxiety, anger, or a sense of inadequacy. These feelings are usually temporary and are soothed by parents, friends, and partners. It is estimated that about 10 to 15% of women will develop a more severe postpartum depression, which is considered temporary, treatable, and somehow accepted by the society, comparing with other forms of mental illness. What is less known, it is that men do get postpartum depression as well. Why is that? What triggers depression and anxiety in the most wonderful moment of our lives, when we should feel only joy and love for the newborn? Just think a little bit of how we adults are looking at babies. Most of the time, we project love, and we are less judgmental, perhaps because we know that the baby will not judge us. When my children were born, there was nothing in that moment but love, and I wish I could hold that feeling for my entire life. I didn't know how to do that. What is happening with us when we are growing? What are we doing wrong? What is our family doing to us? Our friends, our education system, our society? Instead of keeping and growing that feeling, we seem to lose it on our journeys. Why is that? It is the hardship that we're going through life sometimes. Life is tough. We all know that. There is suffering in life and there is defeat. No one can avoid it. Yet, there is our perspective that determines whether we go through the ups and downs of life with a strong heart, mind, and soul, or with a weak one, whether we emerge as hearty human beings or not. Is there a way back to the primordial love? And if yes, how can we get there? This is the hardest question that one can ask of himself. Who am I? By doing so, one can start the journey within himself, even if he has no clue or just a vague idea of how to answer this question. Philosophers, poets, scientists, academics, artists, politicians, theologians, all have tried to answer this question for themselves, but couldn't reach a consensus. We are wanderers in this world in searching for ourselves. We are struggling with our identity all our life, and we're in searching for a core sense of ourselves. Am I this body? Am I this mind? Am I this soul? Am I my emotions? Am I my feelings? Who am I? By searching for an answer to this question, we often label ourselves. I'm Romanian. I'm coming from an Eastern European culture. I'm an immigrant. I'm a Christian. I'm a male. I'm white. I'm middle class. I'm married. I'm 46 years old. Is this who I am? What if I tell you this is not who I am? We think that our identity is fixed and predetermined by the place we were born, by the culture we live in, by our religion, our ethnicity, our gender, our social status, or our age. And this, my friends, as I discover, is a big mistake, because we separate one from the other, putting ourselves in highly unique categories and judging the people who are not like us. This leads to a path of discrimination and even hate. So this is not who I am. Who I am has to have no barriers. We try to answer this question differently on different circumstances and different roles that we play. I'm an associate professor in the School of Health Policy and Management. I'm teaching and doing research in health informatics. Is this who I am? Well, I can tell you that this is not who I am. This is just a temporary role that I'm playing. If I lose my job or I retire, I'll no longer be a professor here. The problem is that we identify ourselves with our job. And I did this. It was very destructive. So this is not who I truly am. When I was ill, I have a totally different view about myself. I'm shy, I'm introvert, I'm avoiding people and challenges, I'm perfectionist, I'm negative, I'm untruthful, I'm judgmental, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm guilty, I'm ashamed, I'm angry, I'm afraid, I'm incompetent, I'm unworthy. This is not who I am, but I totally believed in that image. Who I am today, I'm kind, I'm compassionate, I'm happy, I'm aware of my thoughts and emotions, I'm present in my life, I'm exploring and growing, I am courageous, I'm loving. Is this who I am? What if I tell you that this is not who I am? That this is just another perception that can go away like this back to the illness perception. I have been there, and I know this can happen. In less than 2 weeks, my mind shifted from one perception to the other. So this is not who I am. The question is of a present moment, because we are not fixed in time. I'm a different person now than I was 4 years ago. And my body has changed. My perception of the world has changed. Yet, there is something that remains unchanged, constant throughout our life. What is that? I remember many books that I read in my childhood, featuring characters in the woods. From fairy tales written by Grimm brothers, like Hansel and Gretel, to others like Little Red Riding Hood, or the 100-Acre Woods in the Winnie the Pooh. The woods was depicted as the scary place to be. When you walk in a deep, dark forest, it is hard to move quietly because you're stepping on leaves, snapping twigs, and hitting branches. The animals are quiet though. They have to be so in order to survive. The forest is dense, branches are growing closely together, sometimes hanging to the ground, so we cannot traverse it quickly. Running is almost impossible. In the woods, you get lost very easy. You don't have landmarks, everything looks the same. You cannot count on the sun, the moon, and the stars because you cannot see them through the canopy. When in the woods, you expect strange noises. You hear birds, crickets, wolves, trees squeaking, the wind blowing through the leaves. The best way to hide is to stay still. My story is one of a walk through the deep forest. A tough one, where I have took off the path. Wolves and nightmares gather around me, and I was scared on my way. In December 2012, I was hospitalized with a diagnosis of major depression and with psychotic features. I spent 2 weeks in the psychiatric unit at Toronto General Hospital. At that time, I was not accepting that I have an illness. I see it as only a burnout from work. And indeed, illness came on a background of exhaustion and chronic fatigue. I was the undergraduate program director in the School of Health Policy and Management, in a program with almost 1,000 students, and with only one secretary who was new to her job. I was doing everything from student recruiting, advising, endless cases of plagiarism, having higher teaching load than other units. My research suffered. I was very unhappy. Ironically, my thoughts in the hospital were also related to my job. I wanted to return as soon as possible and take back my responsibilities, not wanting to lose that job. My nightmares were also connected with the job. I was seeing enemies who wanted to hurt me. I have seen the administration as the enemy that wanted to fire me because I'm not good enough. I pushed myself and returned to work in about 3 months. For a year, I was back teaching, but I was not feeling well. Soon, the inevitable came, a relapse. Not so severe, but it put me off for another 3 months. Except for taking medication, I did nothing to change. And when I pushed back up to work again, I failed, this time going on a long-term disability. It is only then when I started to do things that to help myself heal, seeing a psychologist, seeing a naturopath, seeing a priest. It took me about 6 months to feel better, and I thought I had conquered the illness and returned back to work. What a mistake. I have returned to the same environment with the same thoughts. In 3 weeks, I was back in hospital with the worst psychosis ever. It took me another 1.5 years to finally realize what happened with me and to stay in front of you today, telling you my story through the deep woods. In Greek mythology, Aphrodite was the daughter of Zeus, the king of gods, and she was the goddess of love, beauty, pleasure, and procreation. The Greek poet Hesiod, who lived in the 7th century BC, wrote a poem called Theogony, describing the origins and genealogies of the Greek gods. In this poem, Aphrodite has an adulterous relationship with Ares, the Greek god of war, and twin brothers were born, Phobos, which is the word for fear, and Deimos, which is the word for terror. They grew up and became Ares' constant companions, driving his chariots on the battlefield. They were seen as the gods of fear, of loss. So from love and war, fear and terror can be born. One of the biggest problems on our planet, fear, affects us all, both at an individual and a collective level. There is no single human being who didn't experience fear at one point in their life. Most of us are living with fear all our life. Let me tell you a little bit about my fears. I was born and grew up in a communist oppressive regime in a climate of lie, fear, and terror. I've learned as a child to keep my mouth shut, that if I criticize the government or the President Ceausescu, I will end up in prison, that I'm not allowed to go to church, to read banned books. I learned to be suspicious about everything. I've learned to lie. I've learned to be afraid. My godfather was a journalist, and he ended up in prison and died because he criticized the government. As a child, I was not aware what was happening with me. I only noticed that my parents were not communicating to me as much. I later realized that this protected me. When I grew up, fear took different forms: fear of punishment, fear of judgment, fear of death. After the '98 revolution that removed Ceausescu from power, freedom didn't come right away. People had to fight for it. Students like myself at that time went in the streets asking for their rights. And fear and terror was seen once again as government brought to Bucharest miners to beat the students. Romania was not a safe place at that time. When I married and my son was born, I had the fear of being a parent, not knowing what to do with the little astronaut that came on our planet. When my wife and I decided to move in Canada in 2001, the fear of unknown took me over. While waiting for the Canadian visa, the 9/11 tragedy happened, and we were shocked, not knowing what to do. Should we stay home? Should we go out in the unsecure world that looked at war? So with all the fears, we made the decision to immigrate. So we will not have regrets in our life because we didn't try it because of the fear. So we feared and did it anyway. When I got this job at York University 14 years ago in what was called a vacuum position, as one of my hiring committee members told me, being a recent immigrant, hired in the brand new School of Health Policy and Management, having to design a new program by myself, knowing little about the Canadian healthcare system, I saw that both a challenge and an opportunity. But I can still remember the strong emotion of fear that I've experienced on July 1st, 2002, the day before I started. Unfortunately, the fear of unknown, the fear of failure, of exposing myself, stayed with me, grew up over time, and took monstrous forms. I was afraid to interact with people. I developed social anxiety. I had this fear of losing my job. I was afraid of myself. I was afraid of my own shadow. All these fears transformed me into a defensive and isolated person. I put myself in a cage, isolating myself from the world within and the world outside, not being present in my own life. I had experienced feelings of guilt and shame, and I was blaming others for my problems. Blaming the communist regime that I grew up, blaming my parents, blaming the education system, blaming people around me, blaming the administration at York, judging and blaming everyone. I was thinking that people want to manipulate me, or they're acting for a misguided sense of loyalty. I was seeing enemies everywhere who were attacking me. The guilt and shame that I experienced led to anger. Without recognizing anger in myself, I succumbed to anxiety and panic, creating great harm to myself and to those who care for me. I was attacking myself. I'm shy, I'm introvert, I'm avoiding people and challenges, I'm perfectionist, I'm negative, I'm untruthful, I'm judgmental, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm guilty, I'm ashamed, I'm angry, I'm afraid, I'm incompetent, I'm unworthy. This image that I created in my mind about myself was very destructive. All the information that I received, I was interpreting it from this perspective, and my mind made connections in such a way to give me more proof that this is indeed who I am. I was hating this image, but I was believing strongly in it. I believed that this is who I am, and there is nothing I can do to change it. So I fell into depression. I stopped caring about myself. I stopped eating. I spent days and months at home without leaving the house, without moving or without getting fresh air. I didn't socialize. I stopped caring about personal hygiene. I was not sleeping. I was a living dead. One of the distorted thoughts that I have was to identify myself with a job. I thought that all my problems are coming from work, that I am incompetent, that I'm a lousy teacher, and that I didn't accomplish anything in research. In a severe episode of depression, I thought that by leaving my job, all my problems will just go away. I wrote my resignation, and I was about to send it, but someone stopped me. However, the thought stayed with me, and when I relapsed last year, I was convinced that the resignation is the only exit to my problems. So in an act of courage, I thought at that time, from the 5th floor of the Center for Addiction and Mental Health downtown, I sent an email to our dean that I resign. At that time, I was so convinced that I will not return to York University, the place of my pain. The psychosis and paranoid thoughts took over my mind. I was hearing voices. I had suicidal thoughts. One time, I ran from home, and my wife was so scared, she called the police. And they searched for me for about 3 hours before finding me wandering on the streets. Can it get worse than that? Well, I was so close of losing my life. I hit the bottom. The verses you are reading are from the most well-known, appreciated Romanian poet, novelist, and journalist, Mihai Eminescu. With his literary genius, he was not able to cross his dark forest. He died at the age of 39, struggling with bipolar disease. The illustration was made by my grandmother's sister, who was a well-known Romanian painter and illustrator in the 60s and 70s. My journey through the mental health system started in December 2012 in the psychiatric emergency at Toronto Western Hospital. For about 8 hours, I was interviewed by physicians, medical residents, social workers to determine if I need to be hospitalized. The interview was brutal, and I had to answer questions I've never asked of myself. But somehow I opened up and I told all the crazy thoughts coming out to my mind. I was in deep confusion and distress, not trusting anyone, including myself. Feeling that it was the end of my life. I thought I lost everything, and I have nothing to lose if I can tell my story to everyone. So they were convinced that I have a major depression episode with psychotic features, and I was admitted to the psychiatric unit at Toronto General Hospital. For 2 weeks, I have experienced the strangest time of my life. Not only that I was facing my demons, but I was surrounded by people with serious mental illnesses, and the interaction with them frightened me even more. When I was deemed incapable of making any treatment decisions for myself, and that my wife has the right to make decisions for me, I felt completely hopeless. The program there was designed to help people with mental illness in many ways, through art, music, film, occupational therapy, but I was blindfolded, seeing only my problems that cannot go away, and I didn't accept help. I met there people from all walks of life, women with postpartum depression, people with severe eating disorders, people with dementia, homeless people who got refugee in the hospital during the harsh winter. I didn't interact much with them. I didn't care about them. My problems were more important. When I was about to be discharged, I learned that from hospital, I will not be referred to a psychiatrist. Psychiatrists are not taking patients, and even I will find one, there will be a long waiting list. I was told that I'm on my own, and the doctor expected me to come back to the hospital if something is going wrong. They said they will send me to my family physician unless I will accept to enroll in a research study called Stop Psychotic Depression, where I will be closely monitored while taking the medication. My wife agreed, so I got a psychiatrist. For the next 2 years, I relied entirely on the biomedical model, going to the hospital regularly, taking my pills, and hoping for better. It didn't work. It held me barely functional for a while, but the depression and anxiety were still governing my life. The second time I got in the hospital, it was a manic episode, and the psychosis was worse. The diagnosis now was bipolar disease. I was admitted at CAMH, and I stayed for 19 days in the hospital, and at one point I was even moved to an acute care unit, what I called a solitary confinement. I was not allowed to leave that unit, even accompanied by my wife. The conditions there are of the third world country. Soiled linen full of bedbugs, garbage everywhere, solitary rooms with glass doors so everyone can see you, broken toilets. There were people like me in deep crisis, and the scenes I saw were horrific. People screaming all the time, others strapped to their bed. But the worst of all, what I perceived was the lack of empathy and care from the healthcare team for these human beings. It is true that my perception was altered at that time. I couldn't see the bright side, but I experienced neglect and stigma. I have survived by wearing earplugs and by immersing myself in reading, even if I was not able to focus and remember what I was reading. When I was discharged, I faced again the barriers of our mental health system. No psychiatrist available to follow up unless, because of the severity of the illness, I will be referred to a partial hospitalization program at CAMH, where for all 8 weeks, I will be closely monitored by a healthcare team. The partial hospitalization program, PHP, is a structured treatment program for people experiencing acute psychotic and severe mental health issues. There's an interprofessional team of psychiatrists, nurses, social workers, occupational therapists, recreationists, peer support workers, pharmacists, psychologists, working together in a less restrictive, non-institutionalized environment. They have therapeutic activity groups, and every day was different. We had art therapy, music therapy, spiritual groups, mindfulness meditation, playing basketball and badminton in their gym, swimming, cognitive behavioral therapy groups. Food and transportation was covered by the program. My high anxiety at that time prevented me to enjoy fully these activities. The program ended in October last year, and I had to find a psychiatrist. So my wife, reaching out to the Romanian community for help, And someone in our church recommended a Romanian psychiatrist who works at Mount Sinai Hospital. I was very happy to express my thoughts in my native language. Speaking to your own language, to someone who also understands your culture that you're coming from, it is very important on the journey to self-discovery. Last year in January, I was referred to the day program at Mount Sinai Hospital. They call it the transitional program. For 3 months, I was attending 4 mornings a week, a group treatment program that helped me to build new cognitive skills, to improve the sense of well-being and the ability to function in my daily life. The emotion focus groups, the cognitive behavior therapy, art therapy, the focus on here and now have all contributed to my healing. I was feeling much better after completing that program. On my journeys through hospitals and day programs, I have experienced the dominance of the biomedical model, paradigm, in mental health, and I have noticed social and structural inequalities in mental health system. I met people who lost everything, who were homeless, no support, no access to psychiatrists, psychologists, and treatments. For some, their only hope was the day program, but some of them couldn't bear the fear of looking inwards, the discrimination and the stigma, and they dropped out. Active discrimination against people with mental illness is systemic. From the hospital, from the emergency department on the hospital, where you have to declare you're suicidal to be admitted immediately, where there are people with severe illnesses who are sent back home, to the patient experience of bad treatment in psychiatric wards, to the discrimination at the admission process of different programs, where if you're suicidal this time, you will not be admitted, to the discrimination of psychiatrists in selecting and accepting new patients, to the stigma present in our society. I have experienced it all. I was blessed to be covered by the insurance all this time. However, I perceived discrimination in the relationship with the insurance company. I felt they pushed me back to work when I was not ready. They asked for access to my entire psychological record to continue my benefits. They sent letters in a legal language that was threatening and lacking any humanity. I'll stop here with the dark side of the story, and let me tell you about the triggers that allowed me to turn the corner and the ingredients that allowed me to get better. When I was first admitted in the hospital, I was given an antidepressant and an antipsychotic, probably the best treatment for major depression with psychosis. I took this combination for 1.5 years, but I was barely functional, having no energy and struggling to come back to work and teach. The side effects were extreme drowsiness and weight gain. At one point, I had 40 pounds more than I have today. I didn't believe in drugs. Feeling so bad, I decided to stop taking the medication without letting anyone know. And I started to feel better for a while, but I relapsed and started to take them again for a short time, though I was still thinking that medication cannot help at all. Then I stayed out of it for almost a year, a time when I was focusing on other options for treatment. I was seeing a naturopath who prescribed me vitamins and natural supplements that helped me to get better for a while, but I relapsed again. At CAMH, I was put on a different drug. The side effects were even worse than the first combination. I was very confused. I was fidgeting. I didn't want to take them anymore. At Mount Sinai, my psychiatrist had a trial and error approach. We changed drugs until we found a combination that worked for me, that gave me more energy, made me less depressed and emotionally stable, and it had less side effects. I am now taking my pills knowing that they help me. I have embraced the treatment and now it's working. However, I was not cured. I was living with high anxiety and my negative thoughts were still there. But medication helped me to reach a place where I was able to start the healing process. So what else I did besides medication? 2 years ago, when I had a second relapse of the illness and ended up on long-term disability, I realized that I cannot go out of this alone. So I started to accept that I have an illness and that I need help of others, and became open to the idea of psychotherapy. I started with cognitive behavior therapy, which is a form of psychotherapy developed in the 1960s by Dr. Aaron Beck at University of Pennsylvania. Cognitive behavioral therapy, as defined by the Beck's Institute, is based on the cognitive model, which assumes that the individual's perceived a situation is more closely related with their reaction than the situation itself. One important part of CBT is helping people change their unhelpful thinking and behavior that lead to improvement in their mood and functioning. So I started as a diligent student, doing thought records, writing down what was going on my mind, my automatic thoughts that were keeping me trapped in the prison of my mind. I was challenging these thoughts, bringing evidence for and against each thought, trying to come up with more balanced or realistic thought. My psychologist taught me to do this process from a self-compassionate way. Thought by thought, I started to change the depressive and anxiety ones with more positive thoughts. I realized that I have only few of so-called hot wire thoughts that are triggering the fear and all the waterfall of negative thoughts. To understand what I mean by changing thought by thought, let me read you what I wrote on one CBT session on December 15th, 2014. So this is from my file. I blame myself for failing at work. I feel that I'm incompetent and I will never be able to go back to teach and do research again. And this is what I wrote to myself from a self-compassionate voice. Don't think like that. Over the years, you have done many good things, and people around you appreciate what you did. The reality is that you are burned out and you need time to recover. You are fortunate to have this long-term disability insurance that gives you the time to focus on yourself. Use this time wisely and be kind to yourself. Do not think about job now. It may be that you'll have to change your career, but first you need to get clarity on your thoughts, inner peace, and reconnect with an old friend, you. This was only 4 months into the CBT program. I have learned that most of us are unaware that what we perceive as reality is in fact our interpretation, but we live and react as if this interpretation is the reality itself. That our thoughts have a kernel of truth surrounded by our interpretation, which sometimes is delusional. I've learned that things are not always as they appear to be. No one can escape from illusions unless he looks at them. The illusions are the source of fear. CBT helped me to great extent to become aware of my illusions, but CBT alone couldn't prevent a relapse. Why did this happen? What was missing? Vincent van Gogh, whose painting you recognize in the background, suffered from bipolar disorder. He was fighting with his nightmares, hallucinations, insomnia all his life. With all his genius, he couldn't face his personal demons and eventually committed suicide. However, this quote shows that he had an insight in how to let go his morbid thoughts. Most of the time, my attention was absorbed in my wandering mind, ruminating thoughts, and I was not really present in my life. I was operating mindlessly on what we call autopilot. Or to put it in a more poetic way, I was a passive spectator in my life. The next step of my journey was learning about mindfulness, which is a state of awareness of thoughts, feelings, body sensations, and surrounding environment. I took a course on mindfulness-based cognitive therapy with my psychologist that was based on the work of Professor Zindel Segal at University of Toronto. Mindfulness is known more as a Buddhist practice. However, the mindfulness that is typically taught in the business and academic settings is completely westernized. It is purposefully devoid of spiritual or religious connotations and focused simply on the act of awareness. Mindfulness meditation is a wonderful technique if you practice regularly, but most important, if you understand deeply its philosophy. Many people think of meditation only from the perspective of reducing stress and enhancing executive skills, such as emotion regulation, attention, and so on. Mindfulness meditation, seen just a breathing technique, cannot change your mind. But mindfulness, seen as a non-judgmental, joyful awareness of the present moment, can make a shift in your thinking. So I learned how to meditate using the body as the focus and respiration and an anchor to the present moment. My favorite is the body scan meditation developed by Jon Kabat-Zinn, professor of medicine at the University of Massachusetts. I learned how to strengthen my brain with meditation. I became aware of the workings of my mind. I learned how to take a kinder, more gentle attitude towards myself. I learned how to focus on here and now. I've learned to be less judgmental. However, knowing all of this, I relapsed into depression. Why did this happen? What was missing? One friend of mine from Romania, who is passionate about music, told me about this documentary, Alive Inside. I warmly recommend it to you. Social worker Dan Cohen, through his nonprofit organization Music and Memory, advocates for use of music therapy for dementia patients. I was amazed to see the power of music therapy in bringing back to life people that were completely catatonic. Dan Cohen places headphones on their patients, playing music from their childhood and youth, and see them becoming very expressive. Music can take you back to the most special times of your life, especially those times when you were a kid and had your mom cooking while listening to the radio. Music is just amazing. It can bring forth so many emotions. Have you ever noticed that our most vivid memories are those of where we had strong emotions? I remember the day my parents forgot to pick me up from kindergarten and I was waiting scared for a couple of hours. I remember my first day at school, my first day at work, my wedding day, the birth of my children, their first step, their first word, the death of someone dear. Emotion is the vehicle that imprints in our memory these events more strongly than others. So I went through all my music library and selected pieces that were resonating with me, remembering me about good times. Pieces that were uplifting, that were creating strong emotions. All genres, from classical to rock, from pop to jazz, from different cultures, everything that was lifting up my spirit. I made a playlist that I was continuously listening to that music in my car, at home, everywhere. My kids were, oh no, not again, not that music. And it worked to some degree. My mood was changing, I became happier as I was singing, and I started to change the way I see the world. So music, my friends, is a key factor that can trigger a well-being state. Music bridges the gap between gender, cultures, social status, religion, political view, age. But music alone was not going to make the big change that I was expecting. I relapsed into the illness listening to the same music. Why did this happen? What was missing? Similar to music, art can create strong emotions. M.C. Escher was a Dutch graphic artist who made mathematically inspired woodcuts and lithographs. Here's one of the Escher's greatest works, called Day and Night. What we see is the same Dutch townscape during the day and the night. The two towns are joined by curious fields that are magically transforming into flocks of birds. Day and night join together, as do the sky and the earth. You can see the white birds only during the night and the black birds during the day. But the choice which way to travel is yours. Art, my friend, is another way to transcend our barriers. But you can paint like Van Gogh and still be trapped in your mind and haunted by demons. Why is this happening? What is missing? I took this picture in December in the park behind my house. You can see the ice on the water, and in the background there is a bridge. I took many walks in the park. Whenever my wife, my father, my father-in-law, friends succeeded to convince me to go out of the house. I had a fear of leaving the house, a fear to be seen by other people. On my long walks with them, I often stop on this bridge, watching the water flowing by, creating small whirlpools through the rocks. The river was different every time. Sometimes it came with high waters after the rain. Other times it was almost dry. I saw a beaver playing in the water in the summer and big trout fish in the fall making their way upstream to tremendous obstacles to lay their eggs. I often meditated on this bridge, and as my psychologist taught me, I was imagining that I'm putting my thoughts one by one into the water, letting them go. The ever-changing flow of the water can help us comprehend the ever-changing flow of the waters of our lives. I read someone a parable that I want to share with you. Water can teach us how to live. Water, wherever it flows, brings life and share it with those who need it. It is good and generous, knows how to smooth the bumps of the land. It is brave, its surface is smooth, but it can form high waves. It is wise, and it goes around the rocks and cliffs that comes in its way. It is perseverant. How many serpentines it has to take upon, it will never lose its direction to the eternal aim, the sea. It is conscious of its aim, and however dirty it became, it endeavors to be clean. It has power to renew itself. Taking this example of water, we can learn how to live correctly our life. As Genevieve Gerald, a rehabilitation counselor in California, said, this continuous flow, whether it will be of water or life events, creates awareness that in any moment, anything can change. This potential and the promise of this possibility is part of the power of living in the moment. Being in nature helped me physically, and meditating helped me to clear my mind. However, that was not enough. I was still afraid. I was still having anxiety. Something was missing. What was that? The most exciting way to be on a healing journey is to read a good book. There are only 3 of the most powerful books that have produced a shift in my thinking. The best antidepressant ever was prescribed to me was a book called Guilt, Shame, and Anxiety, Understanding and Overcoming Negative Emotions by Dr. Peter Breggin. He's an American psychiatrist, a Harvard graduate, 80 years old, who wrote this book at the summit of his life. He has been called the conscience of psychiatry for many decades of successful efforts to reform the mental health field. From this book, I have learned that, quote, the origins of our demoralizing emotions are literally prehistoric. First, because they're the result of millions of years of biological evolution, and second, because they were shaped in the infancy and childhood before we were cognitively able to recall or understand what was happening with us. I realized that our feelings of guilt, shame, and anxiety have little to do with reality, with anything wrong, shameful, and stupid that we have done. They are impositions that often disrupt and inhibit our more positive capacities for reason, cooperative relationship, and love. Another good book that came to my attention recently when I was reading the York University Institutional Integrated Resource Planning Strategy document on quality of teaching. It is called Mindset by a Stanford University psychologist, Carol Dweck. She had a very simple but powerful idea that people had but two mindsets. A fixed mindset that assumes that our character, intelligence, and creative ability are static givens that we cannot change in a meaningful way, and success is the affirmation of that inherent intelligence. People in a fixed mindset are avoiding challenges, are giving up easily when they face obstacles. They believe that talent alone creates success without effort. They ignore useful negative feedback and are threatened by success of others. A growth mindset, on the other hand, thrives on challenges and sees failure not an evidence of unintelligence, but as an opportunity for growth and for stretching existing abilities. In a growth mindset, people believe that the most basic abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. This view creates a love of learning and resilience that is essential for great accomplishment. The third, but probably the most influential author is Dr. Augusto Cury, a Brazilian psychiatrist, psychotherapist, and writer. He's a researcher in the field of quality of life, development of intelligence, addressing the nature, construction, and dynamics of thoughts and emotions. This book, Think and Make It Happen, teaches us how to take care of our most precious possession, our life, and especially our mental health. The program developed by Dr. Cury provides guidance on how to direct our thoughts, manage our emotions, protect our memory, the art of self-dialogue, among other techniques. The books that I read revealed to me that life is the greatest book of all. With all the insight and knowledge I got from reading, I still relapsed in depression and anxiety. Why was that? What was missing? Cognitive behavioral therapy gave me the courage to write down my thoughts. So at one point, I started to write in a journal where I was writing down what I was learning from the books. Writing helped me become more aware of my experiences, documented my progress, and most importantly, was like a message sent to myself over time. When I relapsed again, I had this journal to go back to my positive experiences that gave me the power to rise again. When I was feeling better, I started to write poems. And the first poem was addressed to my wonderful psychologist who cared for me for the last couple of years. And I want to read it to you because it reflects my journey. The poem is called Gratitude. In deep depression and distress, I prayed that I'll be saved, that I can change what went astray and find myself that I mislaid, so in my life you came one day. With gentleness and patience, you started to discover the fear and distrust that kept me slave, the negative of me I tried to cover, and weird ways I have behaved. You gave me strength and courage to see my scary demons I have conceived in me through self-delusion, my creepy thoughts and strong emotions that kept my soul in prison. With time, I got aware how twisted my mind was, my reasoning and judgment so askew, the prejudice in me and all the flaws starting to doubt all that I knew. You taught me how to calm my mind with meditation, and that awareness to all it is the key. Watching each thought and each emotion, I slowly started to be free. Compassion, love, and kindness for all the humankind that I myself discover to be a vital part unlock my soul, and make my mind to listen to my heart. Like miracles have worked to shatter my illusions, the sorrow was transfigured into enormous joy, the scary thoughts into amazing lessons, keeping me now on a bright way. This is dated May 25th, 2015. I thought I was cured. My mind was working beautifully. I was feeling great. However, in 2 months, I was back in hospital with the worst psychosis ever. What went wrong? What was missing? Our health, it's not only physical, mental, and social, but also spiritual. We are afraid to talk about spirituality, especially in the academic environment. We often put an equal sign between spirituality and religion. And we all know that religions have separated us throughout the history. Religions keep us stuck in certain dogma and belief system. Spirituality is concerned with growing into and experiencing who you really are. Medical science has the healthy person in view when it tries to guide the sick person to health by various therapeutic methods. Spirituality, on the other hand, has the healthy person in view from a holistic approach, but let the sick find his own path to be healed spiritually, but with guidance. Real knowledge of oneself is not intellectual, it's experiential. The change of our mind that leads to a fundamental transformation in how we look at ourselves and others and God begins with the journey inwards. Saint Isaac the Syrian, who lived in the 7th century, said, "Enter eagerly into the treasure house that is within you. Dive into yourself, and in your soul you will discover the stairway by which to ascend." When I grew up in the communist Romania, my parents and grandparents never spoke with me about religion or spirituality. The notion of God did not exist in our conversations. What is interesting is that I was baptized in secret in my grandparents' house and not in a church where the sympathizers of the oppressive regime may denounce you to the security forces. The regime was afraid of religion and spirituality as it may awaken the people to fight against them. I have only one memory of my grandmother taking me to church when I was about 5 years old, and memories from the high school when on the Easter day we went to church at midnight to lit candles. We didn't understand what we were doing, why we're there, but it was something cool. After the 1988 revolution, there was a revival of the Orthodox religion in Romania, especially in the young generation. Students at that time, in search for their identity, were attracted by the promise of the church. My wife, my girlfriend at that time, was one of them, and for me it was the love for her who brought me to the church. For 20 years, I've tried to be a good Christian, attending Sunday Masses, observing the days and periods of Lent, praying and helping others. However, this didn't stop me to get into a deep depression and anxiety. A year and a half ago, I was convinced that by doing what the church teaches us, I can beat the depression and anxiety. So I started to read more the works of the Holy Fathers and started to live a more ascetic life. Similar to what I did to music, I searched for prayers that were resonating with me, creating my own book of wonderful prayers. I was praying for long periods of time in the morning and in the evening, hoping to clear my mind. I was fasting drastically, eating only once a day, a small amount of food, and having days when I completely refrained from food, hoping that in this way I will clean my body. I spent hours and hours with my spiritual father, confessing my sins, trying to get to the root of this illness. In confession, I was able to take dark things out of my chest, things that I didn't have the courage to discuss in the psychotherapy sessions. I had opened and started up to feel very good because the feelings of guilt and shame were fading away. In about 5 months of doing all these things, cognitive behavior therapy, mindfulness meditation, music therapy, art therapy, reading, writing, praying, fasting. I was feeling great. I thought that I was cured, that I'm in perfect health. I was fearless and convinced that the illness is gone, a thing of the past, and that God is on my side now and nothing wrong can happen. What a mistake. I didn't know God. I just created a God of myself, another illusion that I was ready to fight for with everyone for that illusion. The mystical psychosis I fell in was worse than anything. My spiritual father was shocked. He didn't know what to do. My wife, seeing the signs of psychosis, took me to the hospital, and for another year and a half, I was down again with depression and anxiety. Why did this happen? What was missing? You are seeing now a picture of a beautiful monastery built in the 15th century in my home country of Romania. Its name is Voronezh. It's a UNESCO monument and was named the 16th Chapel of the East. It is painted both on inside and outside with biblical scenes. In the 15th century, most of the people didn't know how to read and write, but this church and others like that in the country served as the learning tool through the images. The miracle is that the exterior paint resisted for 5 centuries in the harsh weather, the sun, the winds, the rain, the snow. How can this be possible? With all the technology we have today, it's impossible to create and protect a painting to resist the decay of time for so long. Researchers are analyzing the chemical composition of the paint, and they're still puzzled. They're looking for a secret ingredient that may have made this paint indestructible, and they cannot find it. My friends, it's not hard to see what the secret ingredient was. It is only the love of the monks who preserved this wonder of the world over the centuries. Every time they noticed the painting started to decay, they restore it to its original beauty. Martin Luther King said, "Love is the only force capable to transform an enemy to a friend." When the illness started, I had this illusion that I'm totally alone, abandoned by everyone, that nobody can understand me. The reality is that I have abandoned myself at that time, and everyone else was trying to help, but I was not accepting the help because I was seeing everyone as an enemy. It was like God was sending me angels and I was seeing only demons. I know that I will sound like an Oscar speech now, but I have to thank to all who care for me all this time. To my wife Mihaela, who walked me and supported me when I was lost in the forest, who was reminding me every day what are the things that I should do when I was not listening to her, who extended her patience beyond the limits she thought she had, who has faith that this illness is temporary and I will recover one day, who took most of the responsibilities of our family while she was staying in bed when I was staying in bed, days after days, whose sentiment of love for me was stronger than any thoughts, feelings, and emotions she went through. Thank you, my love. My children stood by me as well. I remember my daughter Mara saying, "Why can't Daddy be as he was before?" And she was writing me messages and making drawings to encourage me. My son Theodore showed so much maturity. He understood what was happening with me, and he was talking to me as he was the adult and I was the child. His words motivated me on my journey. Thank you, Mara and Theo. My father-in-law came from Romania and stayed with us for a year and a half in the last 4 years. He took my responsibilities in the house and protected emotionally my children. Thank you, Florian. My father came to Canada for 1 month. He came every day to the hospital to comfort me. Thank you, Dad. I'm blessed with amazing Romanian friends who graciously offer their time and energy, taking me to the hospital when in crisis, cooking for us, driving my children to their activities, taking me out of the house, being around anytime me and my family needed help. Thank you, Mariana, Claudia and Costica, Adriana and George, Roxana and Mircea, Juliana and Costel, Nico and Emi, Mariana and Mitica, my godson Dragash, my cousin George. My spiritual father, Vasila Elene, was not simply a priest who forgave my sins and confessions, but a wonderful human being who, by his personal example and then through his guidance, helped me to progress spiritually and raise again when I was falling. Thank you, Father Vasila. When I first arrived at the psychiatric emergency at Toronto Western Hospital, our colleague from York University, Professor Joel Lashin, who is also an emergency physician there, stayed with me for many hours and helped me go through the ordeal of the assessment prior to admission. Thank you, Joel. Through all these 4 years of sailing adrift, a friend was checking on me regularly. Our colleague, Professor Crystal Moore, was there when I most needed. He came to my house when he realized I was in crisis. When I wrote my resignation letter, Christo stopped me for sending it, explaining that I need insurance coverage to get well. Without a job and with my condition, it would have been very difficult for me and my family. Christo was taking me out of my house for walks in the park and having coffee together. Thank you, Christo. Our colleague Leanne Ginsberg came to visit me in the hospital, checked the research protocol for medication when I was discharged from the hospital. We visited a couple of times, and she called me from Geneva while she was on sabbatical to check on me. Thank you, Leanne. Professor Marcia Yu was frequently in touch with my wife and making sure that we are fine. She welcomed us in her house and came by to see us. Thank you, Marcia. Professor Mary Viktorowicz was the chair of the School of Health Policy and Management 4 years ago. She was calling me in the hospital, calling my wife to offering her help, and when I returned to work, she helped me to get a lower teaching load. Thank you, Mary. To my colleagues Hannah and Geoffrey, who wrote me encouraging emails when they found out what was happening with me. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Geoffrey. When I finally sent my resignation, what I thought was an act of bravery, our dean at that time, Professor Harvey Skinner, didn't accept it. He reached out to my wife and offered his support. Thank you, Harvey. Discharged from the hospital, I was in the hands of the best psychiatrist in Canada who studied psychotic depression, Professor Alistair Flint, Vice Chair of Research at the University of Toronto. He cared for me for 2 years. Thank you, Dr. Flint. Searching for alternative treatments, I met Dr. Jonathan Prusky at the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine, who mapped out a healing plan for me that was not focusing only on natural pills and vitamins, but on lifestyle changes and psychological strategies that helped me build resilience. Thank you, Dr. Prusky. When I accepted the idea of psychotherapy, being tired to go downtown Toronto for treatment, I just searched online for a psychologist near me. This is how I met Dr. Silvina Galperin, who became for the last 2 years the guardian of my thoughts and the awakener of my consciousness. Thank you, Silvina. At the PhD program at CAMH, there was a warm environment created by my team, Heidi, nurse, June, occupational therapist, Dr. Frantseva, psychiatrist, which helped me enormously on my journey. Thank you, PHP. My psychiatrist at Mount Sinai Hospital, Dr. Christian Ulik, with his careful approach to medication and very direct and logical dialogues we had, challenged me at an intellectual level and helped me to see my life from a different perspective. Thank you, Dr. Ulik. The great team at Mount Sinai Hospital Day Program, Dr. Andrea Bernson, psychiatrist, Julie Han, occupational therapist, Beth Sadavoy, social worker, and Rita Chopra, nurse, helped me on my way to self-discovery. Thank you. To a miracle worker, Dr. Glenn Boggio, chiropractor, who helped me regain my energy. Thank you, Dr. Boggio. Returning to work in November, I was overwhelmed by the love I was greeted with. Old colleagues, new colleagues, a new chair of the school, a new dean, all care for me in a way or another. I finally understood that York University is the place where I belong. I would like to thank so many other people I've been so grateful to have around through all these years. Walking through the dark forest, I saw everyone as an enemy. But on my healing journey, I have learned that there were no enemies except for myself. I was creating all this illusion of who I am, surrounded by friends. And I started to heal when I became my own friend. I told you at the beginning the story of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and Ares, the god of war. What I didn't tell you was that according to Hesiod, they had also a daughter called Harmonia, or Harmony, the goddess of peace, harmony, and concord. She married a mortal man, Cadmos, who became the king of Thebes. My friends, in our constant struggle between love and war, we have a choice to follow fear and terror on the battlefield or to search for harmony on earth. It is in our power to choose the way. All the things I did and I presented you today had a cumulative effect on me. However, I had relapsed many times and I felt there was a secret ingredient that was missing. What was that? I can tell you that most of my journey, I was focusing on myself, to be healthy, to be joyful, to be loving, but I was doing that from an egocentric perspective. I didn't care too much about people around me, and this was a big mistake. No one can get sane in isolation. The moment I realized that it is not enough to become my best friend, but it's important to see all the people around me in the same way, I had a revelation. Guilt, shame, anxiety I felt for myself, I was also projecting it to the world and seeing other people guilty, ashamed, anxious, depressed. So all these feelings were coming back to me and I didn't know why. It was my perception of the world that kept me on a loop of reinforcing these feelings. When I had this aha moment, I decided that from now on, I will seek only the good things in every person I interact with. It may seem very hard to do it, but it's a matter of choice. If you project love, that's what you get back. I've learned that neither love nor fear can be imposed from the outside. It is our perception that makes us loving or fearful. It's in the end a choice. On my healing journey, I have found myself that constant in my life, it's love and nothing else. I have heard our dean saying one word to a student. This word is Ubuntu, which is an old African word expressing the human kindness. It means I am what I am because of who we all are. The merit of becoming who I am today, it's yours. Your love has healed me. On my journey, I also learned to be truthful to myself. The truth made me free of illusions. And with freedom came happiness. Happiness can only be achieved by looking both inward and outward with love. Transforming and learning to enjoy whatever life has to offer. And this requires transforming our autopilot into awareness, greed into gratitude, enemies into friends, blame into forgiveness, abandon into passion, anxiety into patience, depression into vitality, lies into truth, fears into freedom, and hate into love. These are the gifts I have received on my healing journey. From an inattentive person to the play of my life, I started to be the author of my own story. I started my presentation with a quote from Paulo Coelho, and I will end my presentation with a quote from the same author. When I had nothing more to lose, I was given everything. When I ceased to be who I am, I found myself. When I experienced humiliation and yet kept on walking, I understood that I was free to choose my destiny. Thank you. This is for you.